The Airbus A350 is, by almost every technical measure, a better aircraft than the Boeing 787. Better range, better fuel efficiency, higher capacity, more advanced in almost every meaningful way. And two of America's biggest airlines looked directly at that aircraft and said no. United Airlines placed one of the largest aircraft orders in history, almost entirely Boeing 787. American Airlines canceled its Airbus widebody order completely. Both chose the Dreamliner. Both made that choice for logical reasons. Both believed they were making the right call. But what happened next to one of those airlines is one of the most instructive and honestly most brutal strategic lessons in modern aviation history. Same industry, same aircraft type, completely different outcomes. And the reason why has almost nothing to do with the aircraft itself. If this kind of deep aviation strategy analysis is what you're here for, subscribe right now and hit the bell. Let's get into it. To understand what happened, you have to go back to a moment most people have forgotten. United Airlines has just completed one of the biggest mergers in aviation history, absorbing Continental Airlines into a single carrier. And Continental, before the merger, had done something genuinely bold. They were among the earliest believers in the Boeing 787. They'd placed orders years in advance, back when the Dreamliner was still mostly a promise, a revolutionary carbon fiber aircraft that Boeing said would change long-haul flying forever. Now United's new leadership is sitting at the table. They've inherited those orders, and they have a choice. They could diversify, mix in some A350, hedge their bets, spread the risk across two manufacturers. A lot of airlines were doing exactly that. It was the safe, conventional, sensible move. They didn't do that. Instead, United went all in. They kept every single 787 order. Then they added more. Then more again. Over the next decade, they built their entire international strategy around one aircraft. No a 350. No hedging. Total commitment to Boeing's widebody flagship. At the time, some analysts thought it was bold. Others thought it was reckless. Now look at American Airlines. Same era. Different story entirely. American was going through its own massive upheaval. Merging with U.S. Airways. Restructuring. Clawing its way out of bankruptcy. And somewhere in that chaos, they were carrying a serious Airbus order. Dozens of A350s. Billions of dollars committed. But the A350 program was running behind. Delays were piling up. And American's new leadership, freshly merged, laser-focused on simplifying everything, looked at that order and asked a very uncomfortable question. Do we actually need this? They had Dreamliners on order too. Same mission. Similar range. Already in the fleet plan. Why run two completely different widebody types? Two separate training programs. Two separate maintenance setups. Two separate spare parts ecosystems. When you could just not. In 2016, American canceled the A350 order entirely. Doubled down on the 787. Two airlines. Same moment in history. Same competitive pressure. Same question on the table. Completely different answers. And what happened next changed everything. United went all in on the Dreamliner. But why this aircraft specifically? What does the 787 actually do that made United willing to build its entire global strategy around it? The answer has nothing to do with specs. It has everything to do with a concept called the long thin route. Here's what that means. For decades, the way airlines thought about international flying was simple. Take a big plane, fill it with as many passengers as possible. Fly it between two massive hub airports, London Heathrow to JFK, Los Angeles to Tokyo Narita. The logic was pure economics. Bigger plane, more seats, more revenue per flight. If you couldn't fill a huge aircraft on a route, you just didn't fly it. That model worked until it didn't. Because here's the problem. Most of the world's travelers don't live in hub cities. They live in Denver, in Houston, in Washington, D.C. in cities that have genuine demand for international travel. But not enough of it to justify parking a 400-seat aircraft on a route every single day. The 787 changed that equation completely. With a range of over 7,500 nautical miles and dramatically lower fuel burn than previous widebodies, thanks to its carbon fiber construction and next-generation engines, it made something previously impossible suddenly viable. You could fly smaller passenger loads over longer distances, profitably. Not 400 passengers, maybe 250, but on a route that simply didn't exist before. And United saw this before almost anyone else. Look at what they actually did with the aircraft. United launched Washington Dulles to Tel Aviv, a route that had never operated as a nonstop before. They opened Denver to Tokyo Narita, connecting a landlocked American city directly to Japan for the first time. They added routes from secondary hubs that previously had no widebody service at all. These weren't underserved routes. They were non-existent routes. The 787 didn't just let United fly them more efficiently. It let United fly them, period. That's the insight that underpinned the entire strategy. This aircraft wasn't a replacement for older widebodies. It was an entirely new category of route unlocked. Now here's where it gets complicated. Because Americans' decision to cancel the A350 wasn't irrational. It was completely logical. In 2016, American was crawling out of bankruptcy, finishing a brutal merger with U.S. Airways, trying to simplify every single thing about how it operated. And sitting on its books was an A350 order, a completely separate widebody type, requiring its own training program, its own maintenance infrastructure, its own spare parts pipeline. For an airline drowning in complexity, that felt insane. So they canceled it, consolidated everything around the Dreamliner. One widebody type, one training program, one maintenance ecosystem. The analysts loved it. Finally, they said, American is getting serious. This is exactly what a post-merger airline needs to do. And for a while, it worked perfectly. Fleet costs came down. Operational complexity reduced. Training standardized. Then Boeing happened, starting around 2019 and accelerating through the early 2020s. Boeing's 787 production line ran into serious trouble. Manufacturing defects, FAA inspections, delivery halts. At one point, Boeing went nearly 2 years without delivering a single 787 to any airline in the world. 2 years. For United, this was painful. Routes got delayed. Expansion slowed. Plans got pushed back. For American, it was a completely different level of pain. Because American had no backup. No A350 in the pipeline. No alternative widebody on order. No plan B. They had bet everything on Dreamliner deliveries arriving on schedule. And now those deliveries weren't coming. Routes that should have launched didn't. International expansion got shelved. Competitors moved into markets American had been planning to enter for years. And here's the brutal irony that defines this entire story. The decision that made American more efficient, canceling the A350, was the exact same decision that made them catastrophically vulnerable. The moment Boeing stumbled, they had optimized for a world where everything goes according to plan. Aviation never goes according to plan. Simplifying the fleet made American more efficient. But it also made them dependent on a single manufacturer, a single program, a single production line. And when that production line broke, there was nothing to fall back on. That's not a planning failure in the traditional sense. That's a strategy that worked perfectly. Right up until it didn't. Let's go deeper on the route strategy dimension. Because this is the part of the story that reveals what really separates United's outcome from Americans. The concept of the long, thin route isn't just an aviation insight. It's a fundamental rethinking of how commercial air travel can work. The old hub-and-spoke model concentrated passengers at major airports. You flew from your city to a hub, transferred, flew to another hub, transferred again, reached your destination, It was inefficient for passengers. But it was economically necessary, because the aircraft available needed massive passenger concentrations to be profitable. The 787 breaks that necessity. When you can profitably fly 250 passengers on a 14-hour nonstop route, you don't need those intermediate connections anymore. You don't need to funnel passengers through congested hub airports. You can connect cities directly that the old model would never have considered viable. Think about what that means for an airline's competitive position. United can offer Denver passengers a direct flight to Tokyo that no competitor matches from that market. That's not a marginal advantage. That's a route that United owns. No competition, because the route only exists because United has the aircraft and the strategic vision to operate it. And multiply that logic across dozens of routes, opened because of the 787 specific combination of range, size, and efficiency, and you understand why United's all-in commitment produced such a dramatically different outcome. The aircraft wasn't a better tool for existing routes. It was the enabling technology for an entirely new network strategy. An American, by committing to the same aircraft, without the same strategic clarity about how to use it, found themselves dependent on the same supply chain, without the same competitive rewards, same aircraft, completely different strategic leverage. Here's the insight that changes how you see this entire story. This was never really about the aircraft. Yes, the 787 has genuine technical advantages. The long, thin routes are real. The fuel efficiency is real. The carbon fiber construction and its weight advantages are real. But aircraft decisions at this scale are never made in a vacuum. When United places a massive order for 787s, that order affects tens of thousands of jobs across the U.S. supply chain, in Seattle, in South Carolina, in hundreds of supplier facilities nationwide. Choosing Boeing comes with relationships, leverage, institutional support, that choosing Airbus simply doesn't provide the same way for a U.S. carrier. These aren't the reasons on the spreadsheet, but they're absolutely in the room when the decision gets made. There's also the strategic leverage dimension. When you go all in on a single manufacturer, you become one of their most important customers. Priority delivery slots, better pricing across the fleet, early access to new variants and upgrades. You don't get that by splitting your order across two manufacturers and being a medium-sized customer for both. So when you add it all together, system fit, route strategy, fleet simplicity, industrial relationships, negotiating leverage, the A350's superiority on a specification sheet starts to look almost irrelevant. Because the decision was never primarily about the specification sheet. It was about which aircraft fit which strategy, in which competitive context, with which industrial relationships, and which risk tolerance. And those questions have no universal answers. United went all in, committed fully, early, completely, strategically. Today, they're expanding international routes, faster than almost any U.S. carrier, operating one of the most coherent wide-body strategies in the industry. American simplified, made the rational, logical, defensible choice, and ended up wide-body starved at exactly the moment they needed to grow. Same industry, same aircraft type, completely different outcomes. Not because one airline is smarter, not because one aircraft is objectively better, but because one airline bet on a system, and the other bet on a plan. And here's the hardest truth in this entire story. Americans' decision was rational. Given their situation in 2016, given the complexity they were trying to reduce, given the logic of fleet simplification, it was defensible. It just happened to create a single point of failure that nobody planned for. Because nobody plans for 2 years of delivery halts. Aviation never goes according to plan. And that lesson genuinely goes far beyond aviation. The best product doesn't always win. The most advanced technology doesn't always get adopted. The superior option loses every single day to the one that fits the infrastructure, the relationships, the operational reality of the people making the decision. And the safest looking choice, the one that eliminates complexity, the one that streamlines and simplifies, can become the most dangerous choice, the moment the single thing you simplified around breaks. So here's the question. If you were running an airline today, would you choose the technically superior aircraft? Or the one that fits your system, your relationships, your network strategy, even if it isn't the best on paper? Because that's the choice these two airlines made. And only one of them came out the other side stronger. Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know how you'd think through this decision. And if this kind of honest, strategic aviation analysis is what you're here for, subscribe, share this with someone who follows aviation seriously, and hit the like button. It genuinely helps. See you in the next one.